on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and I'm coming at you today with a top 8 Centurion deck profile. I just got back from the Tulsa, Oklahoma regional, or I guess it was actually Broken Arrow. It's very close to Tulsa though. And yeah, we were able to get top 4 actually with Centurion. I made 3rd place. We were able to add another very cool mat to the collection, along with a deck box, so that's very cool. We have quite a few of those now. Yeah, so before I hop into any specifics with the deck, like the list, I do want to say, yeah, it's been like 5 months. There's really no good explanation for that at this point. Like I've said in the past, I do plan to get back to a regular upload schedule. I just had so much non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Like hitting me constantly. In fact, I didn't have much testing for this event at all. Like no testing until the very early Saturday morning of the event, like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I played a few games with my friends and I lost every single one of them. They all completely waxed me. So yeah, again, I'm sorry to like everyone who like wants me to upload more, and I do plan to get back to it, but it has been a while. And more on that at the end of the video, because what I really want to do quickly is get to the profile, because I know that's what a lot of people are here for. They want to see the Centurion list. So yeah, a couple things I'll say before is I want to do shout outs. So obviously shout outs to Steel Fox Games for allowing me to go to these events easier. It's always a big help from them. So yeah, definitely big shout out to Steel Fox Games. Shout out to, you know, all my friends on the trip. They were awesome as usual. I mean, they're cool people. Shout out to Boris. He's a cool guy. I talked to him at the event, so I just felt like giving him a shout out. He's pretty cool. Shout out all my opponents. All my opponents were cool too. So yeah, get those shout outs out the way. And then I also want to mention that this is a pure Centurion list. So there's no Horus in it. And there's no like super heavy or a couple of other versions I've seen. This is pure. Again, I had very little testing. I wanted to play it pure for quite a few reasons, but I guess I'll explain those either in the profile or maybe after when I'm talking about my rounds. So yeah, without further ado, no more wasting time, let's hop into the Centurion deck profile. Alright, so getting on with the deck profile, I'm going to go over my 40 card main deck, my 15 card extra deck, and my 15 card side deck. Sort of explain my ratios and sort of how the cards did at the event, because for most Centurion deck lists, like they're pretty similar, so there's not going to be too much explaining as far as like the ratios and why I'm running them, but sort of like how they perform for me is going to be a big deal. At least more so in comparison to like the ratios themselves. So starting off, we have triple Centurion Primera. Obviously, you're going to max 3 of her. She's the most important card in the deck, being the only tuner to the archetype. Hopefully, if this deck gets some support in the future, they kind of amend this issue with the fact that there's only 1 tuner, because the deck is very easy to like interrupt because Primera is so obviously important to the strategy. But yeah, Primera is like the real reason I'm playing this deck. As I sort of mentioned earlier, I don't think this deck is like the best deck by any means. I think it's like a solid like rogue option. But I really like Primera as a card. She's one of my favorite like new card arts in a long time. I just really like Primera, so I am maxing out 3 of her for very obvious reasons, along with 3 Trudea as well, the other 1 card starter. They're all like 1 card starters, but it is much better to start Primera, because then that means like as an extender you can use Trudea, which is important because if you do set it up like that, I found that it's much easier to make level 12 synchros. Yeah, obviously we're going to max the 3 Trudea as well. And then lastly for monsters, I am on 2 Emeth, which is a lot of Emeth, but I am playing Desires in the list, which is kind of a spoiler. But yeah, if you're playing Desires, I do think 2 Emeth is perfectly fine. Maybe you could still get away with 1 because this card isn't like 1,000,000% necessary to perform like all your combos in the deck, but this card's insane. Honestly, I love Emeth, and even drawing it isn't like the worst because it can be like a pseudo extender on your opponent's turn if you did get hand trapped. Obviously, there's like 38 better cards to draw in your deck, but Emeth is honestly not that terrible to draw, and it's a free discard for field spell, which is pretty nice because, you know, you are always going to have to discard for your field spell. Speaking of, we have 3 stand-up Centurion, which is very similar to Primera in the fact that it is one of the most important cards in the archetype, which means this card is like very powerful, but it also means your opponent knows exactly what they're trying to stop in your deck to stop your combos. Like, I mean, your combo just doesn't exist if your opponent has like 1 Cosmic Cyclone, which is another thing when I mentioned like this deck definitely has some serious flaws and why I don't think it's anywhere near like one of the best decks, even though I do think it's like solid. Stand up is so important for your strategy that it's very easy to interrupt this deck because like they just out this card. Like it got heartbeated against my tier limit opponent, and I wasn't doing any semblance of combo, and I just end up playing with flex spots, right? But yeah, you are going to maximize this because it is one of the most important cards in the deck, and I'm also playing the 1 terraforming to go with it, so you have 4 stand-ups because this card is also a 1-card starter, which gives you, so far, I believe, 10 1-card starters. And then to finish it up, we're playing 13 because we are on 3 Emblema Oath, which this card is very good. I really like this card. The versatility it has, being able to set a spell or trap or place a monster, is very nice. And the lock doesn't come up very often, especially not on turn 1. It's probably never going to come up, the fact that you get locked. But yeah, this card's insane because it's just an extender that gets you like exactly what you need, which is pretty cool. And you are obviously going to maximize 3 of this as well. And then one of the only weird things in the engine, and something I'll go into a little more in depth, is the only other Centurion card I'm playing is actually the Phalanx. And so like I said earlier, I did not have like much testing with this deck, and the very limited hand tests and theory I had with the deck, I was like, Bonds doesn't seem very good, so I decided not to play it at all. Looking back at the event, I don't know if Bonds came up in my game specifically. Well, that's not true. It could have come up if I wanted it to, but it wasn't like necessary. The best thing about Bonds to me is the fact that you can like chain block Legatia, but it does come up, especially if you only play like 1 Emeth in my opinion. Like I play 2, so Bonds was I guess less necessary because I usually have another Emeth in deck. But I can see Bonds being very good when you don't, like when you have your 1 Emeth in grave and you can't like use Trudea to place another Emeth. I can see situations where that's nice. I still chose to play Phalanx over Bonds because I really like Phalanx. Phalanx was like the best card for me at the regional in the Centurion package. Like there's actually so much you can do with this card that I didn't realize until like round 4. I think it was round 3 or 4 when I finally realized you can target your own monsters with this, and that's insane. Like it came up twice where banishing my own monsters was like crucial, because one game I drew only Primera, she got impermed, and then I set Phalanx and I was able to like Valor or Nib Valor my opponent, and then to my Nib I chained Phalanx on my Primera, which saves her from the Nibiru, and then on the next stand I face she special summons herself back and then like procs her effect, which is super good. The fact that this special summons is so crucial for the deck. Because like some people call this card like a Farfa, but it's really not. It's more like a Traptrix Pudica because the card special summons, which is very big for Primera and Legatia as well. Like it's super crucial for that. So there was 2 times where banishing my own monster with this card kind of won the game, and otherwise it was just an insane interrupt that won me like several games, and the follow-up was huge. I think this was like one of the highlight cards of the entire event for me. This card is insane, and I was searching this so often, which I see a lot of Centurion players not do, and I don't know if that's because they're playing the Bonds, but yeah, in my initial thoughts, I didn't think Bonds was very good. Maybe it is. Maybe you should play it in this list. I'm still not quite sure. I think the Phalanx is better if you're only going to play 1 because it's not a brick. Like you can open Fenrir 3 hand traps in Phalanx and that's like pretty good, but like Fenrir 3 hand traps in Bonds is like really bad. So that is it for engine cards. Now on to the non-engine, of which I believe we play 24 non-engine cards. Starting off with the Triple Desires. This card was very good for me at the event. I do always have a little bit of doubt playing this card because I do not like the gamble with the Banish 10. I only had 1 game in testing where I banished all 3 Primera. Luckily that did not happen at the actual regional because that is, you pretty much lose. Your win condition becomes Fenrir and Nibiru, and that's not exactly ideal. But this card was very, very good for me. Like there was 1 game going second against Unchained where I drew off Desires and I drew Talents and Super Poly, and that just like guaranteed I cracked the board because otherwise I wasn't sure if I was cracking the Unchained board or not, and I was like, wow, Desires was insane there. It drew me starters when I didn't have any, and of course once you like finish your combo, if you still have Desires, you can just like draw into like more hand traps, which is essentially what I thought I'd be playing with most of the day. I just assumed that Calamity was never resolving, which it almost never did. And yeah, Desires was good to play with more non-engine. And then if you got drolled on like a Terraforming or a Primera, you could always discard Desires for the stand-up, which is like fine. 3, Super Poly. This was one of the, I want to say better cards all day, but I don't know. Super Poly is like very hit or miss because it's either complete blowout in your matchup or it's like not great at all. Like you might be able to use it, but it's not amazing. In my matchups versus like Rescue Ace, for example, it had application, but it was never like overwhelmingly good. Versus Fire King was pretty solid. But like I mostly played this as like a super good board breaker versus like Vanadium or like any combo decks, because I'm playing Draco Equestrian in the side deck along with Guilty. But that never came up in my matchups. I didn't play against any Labyrinth where I think this card's really good. It was really good when you go first and just set it, kind of like an interrupt, like a trap card essentially. And that's what I really like about cards like Super Poly, Book of Moon. You know, they're good going first and second. It was very good for that. And of course you're running like Fenrir, which combos with this, and you can always like Primera add on your opponent's turn, like grab Phalanx. Like discard it for Super Poly, and then Phalanx is live, which is pretty nifty. Then we have 2 Talents and Call by the Grave. These cards were, of course, solid. I mean, you're a 1-card starter deck, but unlike other 1-card starter decks I played in the past, if you get like hand trapped on your starters, they don't, like Primera doesn't replace herself like a card like Marincess Blue Tang does, right? So if Primera gets impermed, it's very bad. But if she gets like Ashed or Veilered, like Talents can get you out of that situation. These cards were just very good. I think they're solid non-engine to play, especially in a 1-card starter deck. 3 Fenrir. This card I'm still like, I was very sketchy about playing this card because obviously it lets you play into Nib, which isn't ideal. I think there are routes where if you open like multiple pieces of engine and you can play through hand traps naturally because you open like Stand Up, Emblema, Primera, then I think you could choose not to summon the Fenrir in your hand and just discard it for stand-up because you don't want to play into Nib. But if you open like just Fenrir and Primera, I think it's worth it to summon the Fenrir because you're going to lose to 1 hand trap on your engine regardless. It doesn't really matter if it was Nib or not. So you might as well be able to end with Fenrir in case you do get hand trapped by any hand trap that is not named exactly Nibiru. So it's kind of how I look at this card. It was pretty good. There were a lot of games where I opened 2 of it, which felt really bad. Maybe played 2 of this, but it's just so good with your engine because you're playing like Super Poly and Stand Up, which are discards, and you want discard outlets. Just another reason like Desires was good, just getting the extra card. For hand traps, they're pretty much the exact 12 standard hand traps everyone's playing. It's the 3 Ash Blossom, which was very solid all day. The 3 Effect Veiler. There's not much to say about these since these are just like the standard 12 that almost everyone's been playing for the last like 6 months. 3 Imperm. Those are like the 9 low impacts that are just very solid. And then 3 Nibiru. This card was actually very good for me. Like, this is a card I always like to talk about post-event because it's a card that for, like, everyone I talk to, they have different views about Nibiru after the end of the event. Some people, it was not impactful for them. And, like, for me, it was absolutely insane. I nibbed, like, 5 or 6 times, and it was pretty game-winning every time I did. I paired it with Veiler once to win a game. Yeah, Nibiru was very good. And of course in this deck, I think Nibiru is very cool because if you open Nibiru and Effect Veiler, like you can still get to Legatia that way, which didn't come up at the regional, but it can, which I think is very cool. On to the extra deck, we are on double Legatia, which I think you can play 3 of this, it's like perfectly fine. It didn't come up for me, but I also didn't play against, you know, Kashtira Unicorn, which could come up where you need 3. 1 Crimson Dragon. I also don't think you need a second one of this, but you could play it in case something happens to the first one. This is just here to summon pretty much your other level 12 synchros, which are the Cosmic Blazer and the Calamity, the Notorious Calamity. I do want to talk about this card because for me, 1, I didn't really know what this card did until round 3. It had been a while since this card was being played in like the old based like punk decks for Nationals 2022 where like some people were making Calamity with like Formula Synchron lines. It had been a while since that and this card had kind of left my brain. I thought it negated monster effects only for like rounds 1 through 3, which was wild. And I wasn't making this card almost at all because like it wasn't coming up. And still, even after I learned it, was actually just a broken nonsensical card that is just too powerful. I think I still ended up summoning Cosmic Blazer Dragon more during the event. Like after 9 rounds, I think I summoned this maybe somewhere between like 6 and 7 times, and this like 7 or 8. I don't know why exactly that was the case. Most of the time I actually got to resolve Crimson Dragon was like my follow-up turn where I didn't need to like stop my opponent from activating things on field, and like a negate was kind of cool. Then one time I made this because I had Nibiru in hand and like I negated something to get this off board, and then later was able to like Nibiru my opponent. But yeah, I ended up making this more. Yeah, I mean, this card is obviously the reason the deck functions. It's the only reason this deck has a ceiling. Otherwise, as like a 1-card starter deck, I think a deck like Marincess or Salamangre is infinitely better. Their engine just does more. But because of Calamity, like this deck's ceiling is absolutely insane. So we are playing the one notorious, infamous guy. Next up, we have Mistake number 1, which was playing this guy. I was gonna run the Red Hot Supernova guy, but none of my friends had it, and I don't own it, and I forgot to ask my friends to bring it. So I just went in my binder and grabbed the only playable card I had, and ended up playing this card. It actually almost came up round 1 because I played against like Spellbook Runic, and I was like, yo, I could actually make this. But it never came up. You should definitely play anything else over that card. I played 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend. I don't think I summoned it all day. But it's you know, it's there for a very specific purpose, and it's also like a big 3k beat stick, so it's very powerful. 1 Zora, and I of course played the Moon Maiden to go with him. This package did just about nothing. I summoned it once all day versus Unchained, where it just really wasn't that good. He got Talenced, and that was about it. Would I play it again? I essentially played this over Baguska and Zeus because, again, I didn't have much testing. But in my test hands and like my theory crafting with the deck, I was like, I don't think Baguska Zeus is going to come up that much. Maybe this will come up more. It probably didn't. Maybe Baguska Zeus is better. But I do like Maiden's particular. I really wanted to play this card because it lets you go into your SP a little more, which is relevant. Like you can turn Primera into Maiden and then like link off with anything and get your SP effect. So I did want to play this card, and then like the Zora just makes sense past that point. Little Knight I summoned a few times. It was solid. It was that, you know, it's not as good in this deck as other decks, so I don't feel like it comes up that often. It can put your Legatia in grave for Phalanx, which is pretty nice. Typhon, which I summoned 0 times, but I do think you should play it. And then I just have Super Poly targets, which are Mud Dragon and Garura. These were just the only ones that actually came up. And then Draco Equest and Guilty for like the more combo heavy decks that are making Baron and Dissipator in the case of Equest, or Baron and SP in the case of Guilty. Very quickly, I'll go over my side deck because I don't think it's very good. I built it in about 3 minutes. It performed as adequate as it needed to, I guess, but it's not. There's no spice in here. It is literally like I grabbed 5 3-ofs and I'm missing cards I wish I would have played. But obviously I played 3 Droll, which was insane. This card was very good. It is Droll and Luckbird. Like everyone knows, if you're not maining this, you should side it right now. The 3 Bell are pretty impactful if you play against Labyrinth or Fire King, or like potentially Runic, I guess. I only sided this once versus Fire King, I think, though. I sided it versus Tearlaments as well, and it stopped a fusion effect, and that was pretty sick. But yes, 3 Book of Moon, because my deck has 0 like board breaking outs to Pearly. If I don't hand trap them or don't have the correct hand traps to stop their play and they summon Noir, I lose instantly. So I did side Book of Moon for Pearly. I didn't play Pearly, but I did side Book of Moon as like a go first interruption, and I drew it and it was pretty solid. And it only came up once, but yeah, Book was exactly for Pearly. 3 Cosmic, this card's insane. I think everyone should be playing this format because not only are like Runic decks pretty popular, but also like Centurion is like a solid rogue option that I think you should keep in the back of your mind. I think it's good versus other decks too. Like it's really good for me. This was for like Gold Sarcophagus. That was a big one because I learned in testing that my deck has like no out to that card besides SP, and it just stays on the field and beats me. So this was honestly, again, more of a go first card for me. Like I sided it versus Fire Kings and the Runic Bestial, or not Runic Bestial, I didn't play that. Spellbook Runic. I didn't really side this versus Rescue Ace though. I just don't think it like does enough, but yeah, it's a very solid card. You also side it versus like Labyrinth, of course. And then the 3 evenly were the last 3 of I played, and I realized I wasn't siding like Feather Duster, which would have come up a lot for decks like Rescue Ace that I played 3 of. So evenly was great though. I drew it like pretty often. I sided it like 3 or 4 times, and I drew it twice, so that's pretty good. Well, actually, one of the times I drew it, I just discarded it for stand-up because I like their board wasn't good enough to evenly. So yep, that is it for the deck profile. On to like my rounds and explanations and the part that is a little more creative than a Centurion deck profile, I guess. So yeah, talking sort of about the event rather than, I guess, like the profile itself, because some people want to know matchups and stuff, and I like to look back on these videos and see my matchups, as I've said before. I'll kind of go quickly. I'll put all the information on screen so you can get it kind of quickly and succinct by looking at the screen, but I'll mention them briefly. So round 1, I played against Spellbook Runic, which is very cool to see. It was an interesting deck. I remember I lost game 2 because I was playing around the fact that he only had 1 Jowgen, because that's kind of what I'm used to from like 2013 was 1 Jowgen normally. Some of us played 2. So I played around his 1 Jowgen, I made my board, and then he summoned a 2nd Jowgen off of the spell card Judgment, and I lost the game to that, but then I picked it up game 3. Round 2, I played against Unchained. That was also an extremely close game where I ended up like swinging over his Aruha for 900 damage, and there was like 10 seconds left on the clock, so we were able to pick that one up because I had higher life points. It was a very, very close game that went down to the wire though. And essentially I only won because on his turn, he banished his Typhon off Prosperity and wasn't able to Typhon me and swing for any damage. So yep, that's sort of how that round went. Round 3, I played against Centurion, but it wasn't like any of the regular builds like Pure, Horus, or Super Heavy. It was like Synchro, so he was running like Junk Speeder cards and Centurion to like back it up, or running Junk Speeder cards to back up his Centurion. It had a lot of gas, and game 2 I drew no hand traps and he Junk Speedered me, and that was wraps for game 2, but we were able to pick that one up in game 3. Round 4 was my one loss for the day. I played against Brandon. Game 1, I just made an egregious misplay. Again, I had like no testing with this deck, and I wasn't even thinking about playing around certain cards, and I played into Imperm of all things, which is so silly. Who plays into Imperm in 2024? But yeah, I lost to that Imperm because I played it very wrong. And then I ended up losing game 2 to just like Dragoon, swing, pop my stuff and big damage. Round 5, I played against Tearlaments, and of course, you know, Guido and Kilbeck just got hit, but he was playing like a super gas version with like Lightstorm cards and Trick Clown and Minerva. It's pretty wild, and he had like Needlebug Ceilings. It was a pretty cool deck. That one also went to game 3. Round 6 and 7, I played against Rescue Ace. There were a couple notable things that happened those rounds for sure. The Phalanx play I mentioned in my deck profile was actually versus my round 6 Rescue Ace opponent. And round 7, a notable thing was game 3, my opponent just completely bricked. He opened 3 Emergency, Extinguish, and evenly matched, which he was going first, but he sided evenly because he's maining Crossout. So presumably he sided that evenly matched in for his Crossout and then just happened to draw it, which is like unfortunate. Like triple Emergency is crazy. That was very unfortunate for him. My hand was pretty good though, so like I had like Ash, Imperm, Nib, so that was pretty good. It would have been an interesting game if he was able to play, because if we both opened well, it would have been a pretty interesting game. Round 8, I played against Fire King, but it was like Fire King with some hydrants in it. I never saw the hydrant resolve, so I don't know what it was going for, but it was mostly just like pure Fire King with, of course, you know, Snake Eye, or it was playing Snake Eye stuff as well, so it was running like the Flamberge, is that his name? Yeah, so that was pretty good. That one went to round 3 as well. And then round 9, I played another Rescue Ace, so it was my 3rd Rescue Ace. I think this is the only deck I played multiples of. Was there anything notable there? I don't know. I feel like round 9, it was just like who went first won. It felt very like I went first, made a board, got control of the game. He did the same thing game 2, and then game 3 I did it again. It was like there wasn't much interaction, it felt like. So yeah. Some thoughts about the deck, because that's a big thing people want to know, are my thoughts on the deck. Because I had a couple people come up and ask me, like, dude, what do you think of Centurion? I think it's just like an okay rogue deck. Like, I don't think it's good. I think Calamity is fake. That card just is never resolving, which might be one of the reasons I did well at the event with Centurion, was because I literally went into the event assuming my Calamity was never going to resolve. There's like 900 cards in the game that stop that combo from resolving. And I was just like, yeah, Calamity's not happening. And it almost never did. So my win condition would be like Fenrir and hand traps, or like just using my non-engine correctly. That's most of what the deck was for me. Like there's not much skill expression with the engine in this deck. You just gotta sequence things like okay and not mess up terribly. The deck almost like plays itself, to be honest, as far as the engine, as long as you're like keeping up with it. But like using your flex spots correctly is like a big deal. I think that's where I had a lot of success, where I just assumed Calamity was never resolving, so I'm just going to play the flex spot game and win with Fenrir and hand traps, right? Now, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes your engine does resolve and Calamity is insane, which did happen several times, 5 or 6 times. So yeah, like, the deck has a crazy ceiling, but I don't think it has enough like extenders or like resiliency to like your opponent's go second cards to actually do anything with it. I just assume Calamity's not resolving. So that's one of my thoughts with this deck. As like a 1-card starter deck, I feel like it's less resilient than things, or it's also resilient to Nib, which I think is good compared to something like Marincess, for example. It does have some resiliencies to like Nib. It doesn't lose super hard to like very popular cards like Typhon, because you really, or at least on your first turn, you're summoning exactly Legatia. You don't really lose to cards like SP as hard as like something like, for example, Marincess does. It's just this 1-card starter deck that's coming to my head because I play a lot of Marincess. So yeah, I think it's interesting as a 1-card starter it just has the highest technical ceiling because of Calamity, which makes it good. But most of the time, I think you're just going to be playing with flex spots, which is kind of how I went into the event, assuming how it was going to be, and maybe that's why it did okay. Like, I don't play Horus because, one, I don't have the package, so that's a big thing. I have like 1 Seti, not playing that. I also think it does open you up to Ashe really hard, because if you lose 2 cards to Ashe and you have to discard off stand-up, like, any interaction your opponent has past a single Ashe is just game. You just won't have the cards to like keep up with that. So I didn't like that. The super heavy samurai stuff, obviously you can draw cards like Soul Gaia and Benkei, which is like not good. I haven't looked too much in that version, so I don't even know if they're running exactly Soul Gaia or what they're running. But yeah, those are sort of my thoughts on Centurion. I literally played the deck because I like Primera. Like, she's a cool card. I like the way the deck works too, like mechanics-wise. Like, the fact that they're continuous traps and they're summoning, it's nifty. Not a lot of decks have used that function besides like Elemental or Vision Hero. Vision? I don't even know his name, but the Vision Hero that becomes a continuous trap. So yeah, I really enjoyed playing the deck. I think it's very my playstyle, 1-card starter and like 60 flex spots. But yeah, I guess wrapping up this video, because I've done enough rambling. For anyone still listening, I guess I'll talk about sort of my absence, which I've done in like the last 3 videos, so it feels kind of futile at this point, in the sense that I'm saying the same stuff. That wasn't the right word, but I'm saying the same stuff I already said in the past. Like, I do plan to come back to full content eventually. It's just I haven't been as interested in Yu-Gi-Oh! Other things have been popping up, like I've been just really busy changing a lot of things IRL, and it's just kind of kept me from the game. Like, for this event, I had 0 dueling book testing, and I just lost every match in the like 4 matches I had before the event, which was, I mean, I guess it worked out. So yeah, I guess that's all I want to say. Feel free to leave comments on your thoughts, and feel free to roast me on being like an absent YouTuber. I ain't gonna be mad, because that is just true. So yeah, this has been my top 4 Centurion deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.